It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in a control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, mate, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome to the two Jacks. We call them the combo, but we're going to have to come up with a better name because we put our domestic Australian politics and news and media alongside world events for this one-off podcast. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
Good, mate. Now, tell me, there's a bit of news coming out of our old home state of Victoria.
Well, as two very proud Victorians, we would have paid particular attention to the Victorian state election. There was talk of late swings beforehand. There was talk of minority government, and that's within the Labor Party, by the way, Jack.
Yes.
Minority government for Labor. They were going to lose maybe 10 seats, but it looks like the counting today is actually worse than it was on Saturday night for the Libs, and quite a bit worse for the Greens. As it stands, with 7 in doubt, we've got Labor on 52. Just to give you an idea, they were 55 in 2018 with the Danslide. So that's -1 on that calculation. Libs is 16 -1. Nats 11 +3. Greens +1. Others -2. And that's a bit of a surprise for me. I thought there'd be a big crossbench coming up, but no. 7 still in doubt, as I say. But the collects the Libs had, they didn't have many, but they had Bayswater and Bass, but they're now in play with Labor in front of both of them. Two-party preferred, the swing against Labor was 3.5%. The Libs vote is down by almost 1%. And there's been small growth in the Nat and Green vote. But overall, the two-party preferred, I apologise, is 54-46. It was 58-42 in 2018.
After the 2018 loss, history would tell you that you would normally expect some kind of swing back to the losing party. That's what usually happens.
No, absolutely.
And indeed, the Libs did get big swings in some seats, but the seats they got them in were Cororoit, Greenvale, Broadmeadow, Sydenham, Laverton, Mill Park, St Albans, Thomastown, Williamstown, Yan. These are seats they're never going to win.
Never going to win. And look, I do know that, look, the Victorian Labor Party pushed for a bit of renewal. There was Frank Maguire got elbowed out of the way in pre-selection, Eddie's brother, and he obviously had a strong personal following. I think the swing on there was about 20% in Broadmeadows.
Yes. Yeah, that was the biggest swing of all, I think.
Yeah, and that obviously indicates that there was a strong personal following for Frank.
Yeah.
But you know, and I think Labor's vote pushed below 50%. First preference for the first time probably in history in Broadmeadows. But we were talking about a green slide. In fact, the ABC did use that term, Jack. They've won Richmond, that's without doubt, should win Albert Park on voting that I've looked at this morning. But Northcote is now showing Labor in front. Pascoe Vale should be a Labor hold. And it would seem that possibly the Greens will be +2. Labor might end up 55, which is exactly where they stood. So
I was just amused looking at the Greens, that the seats the Greens are winning. All the places that I've never lived in Melbourne are all green.
Well, not Northcote, mate. Not the People's Republic, mate.
Well, I never actually lived in. Well, only very briefly lived in.
Well, you missed
for
out.
A few weeks.
You missed out. It was a fine place.
But Carlton, Fitzroy, Brunswick, Richmond.
Yeah. Well, Brunswick's solid. Rock solid emerald green now. But there was a bit of a move on in Preston and Pascoe Vale. County continuing there, but it looks like Labor will hold, and it looks like Labor will hold Northcote as well. Albert Park seems to be the one that's going to go green. So that would be a net pickup of 2 for the green. So hardly a green slide. They had a green woman on the ABC coverage on Saturday night was claiming all sorts of triumphs, but it seems to be not like that at all. The Libs actually, Jack, they might end up losing 3 or 4.
Could do.
And it's only the Nats that have sort of covered them because they've picked up 3 in the bush.
That's not the Libs' biggest problem. The Libs' biggest problem post this.
Where do we start, Jack?
Well, no, the biggest problem, if you look at looking at the electoral numbers for them, they're going to end up with half a dozen seats under 1% and 5 more under 2%. What constitutes a safe Liberal seat now is a 3% margin.
I shouldn't be laughing, Jack, although I feel I must.
That's a terribly worrying statistic. I mean, parties have gone bad before. For 25 years, the Labor Party in Victoria was unelectable, but it still had its heartland seats that were at no risk of losing. The Liberals are in a situation where they're unelectable, basically, but they haven't got heartland seats of with margins of 10 or 15%.
Brighton, Caulfield, Hawthorn, Kew. Yeah. They're all on the margin there, on the razor's edge now, and fighting a war on 2 fronts, which Labor has been doing quite well. We'll talk about that in a minute, Jack. But the first,
I think there is an element of the lockdown in this that I think just because the swing varied so much from area to area, that suggests to me that it was what was that great description of lockdown? It was the laptop class sitting at home while the working class bought them stuff. And I think that partly explains
there is definitely a reflection
the variety of the swing, so that the Liberals were getting swings in some. The Labor Party was getting swings to it in some areas and huge swings against it in the more working class areas.
Yes, and that's not surprising, I don't think. I mean, the pandemic was always going to hit people on lower socioeconomic statuses than those above them. And that's a very good way of defining it, the laptop class versus the working class. But there are other things at play, Jack.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
So we did see a decline. I wrote a column on Friday suggesting that the first preference votes would go below 70% in Victoria. As it stands, it looks to be about 72%, which is still very low. And if we look at this over the last 30 years, it used to be 90. So 20% of votes are in play. Now, where Labor has lost those votes, they come back through Greens and left-wing parties like the Reason Party and the Cannabis Party and small minor left-wing parties like that. So and there's a real discipline to it. So there's about 85-15 with the Greens vote coming back. But when the Libs vote is breaking down, we're seeing it, traditionally go to parties like FON and UAP and now it's just sort of cooker parties and family first sort of religious fundamentalist parties and things like that. It's not coming back by preferences. It just isn't going back to them. And this is why we're seeing, as we're getting preferences counted, we're seeing that the result is much, much worse for the Liberals than it was actually on Saturday night. So there's that. So that's part of the problem, and that is a federal problem too for the Liberal Party. And something else that we've talked about, is this professional class, and we might look at the professional class going through Bayside Melbourne and Eastern Melbourne, and those professional classes, they tend to veer progressive with their views about social policy and what have you. And that's not necessarily meant that those votes that we might have thought in those socioeconomic areas would vote Liberal are now voting Labor, but they're not. They're not voting Liberal. They might vote somewhere with park their vote with the Greens or another party, but they're not voting Liberal, and that's again a reflection of what we saw in the federal election.
Yeah, I think there are some lessons to be learnt for the Federal Liberal Party in this, but there is a peculiar problem in Victoria, and we've been saying this all along, and that is that the Victorian branch of the Liberal Party is dysfunctional. Now, I was a member of the Labor Party in the days when we were dysfunctional, and there is a way to fix that. And what happened with the Federal Labor Party, people like Gough Whitlam and Mick Young organised a federal intervention. The first thing they do was to get the crazies out of the party or to diminish their influence. People like George Crawford and Bill Hartley. When I first got involved in it, George Crawford was the state president and Bill Hartley was the state secretary. So they pushed them to the fringe of the party, and that's what the Liberal Party needs to do for itself in Victoria. And then they've got to look for some good candidates.
Oh, look, that goes without saying. I mean, but I just want to go back to this notion of federal intervention. It is much, much harder to do with the Victorian Liberal Party. It has state structures,
yes,
and those state structures really stand up almost higher on the ladder than does the federal body. So it's going to be extremely difficult to change this. And look, when we talk about candidates, we had Bryony Hutton, who was disendorsed in Hastings, and that's going down to the wire, right? Counting continues there, but Paul Mercurio is ahead marginally as counting continues there. And of course, they had to disendorse her halfway along the track. Part of the problem is that the Liberal Party is doing their pre-selections literally weeks before in an environment where you have fixed dates for elections. It's bizarre.
Yep, but that's what they've got to do. Whether it's a federal intervention or some other way, they've got to restructure the Victorian branch and make it fit for purpose, and it's not at the moment.
Can I just indicate one more thing that's a real problem for them right now, and that's the millennial vote. So if we define a millennial as someone who has reached adulthood sometime early in the 21st century, those people now, that's a broad demographic, sort of the 18 to 34-year-old demographic, really. It's a big chunk of votes. And from what we're seeing in the federal election, voting analysis there, and then some exit polling and some less perhaps reliable data, is that Libs are only picking up 1 in 5 of those votes. And it doesn't seem to be changing. We might have accepted that to be the case in the 18 to 25 voting demographic. But as these people are getting older, they're not moving to the right. And that's a big problem for the Liberal Party nationally.
Yeah.
So what does Peter Dutton do, mate? Does he put his baseball cap on backwards and start talking to dudes and things like that? What's he do?
What's that wonderful little meme that keeps appearing all over Twitter? Hello, fellow kids.
Hello, fellow kids. Hello, my fellow kids. Yes. Is that what they do? I mean, it's going to be really hard to turn this around for them. We await, of course, the result. Looks like it's going to be very close in New South Wales, but the same forces in the March election there, but the same forces are at play. You've got Teal independents.
Except they haven't got the same dysfunctional party structure in New South Wales that Victoria. It's not great, but it's nowhere near as bad as Victoria.
It's a little bit better prepared, but they have got that sort of Teal block coming up against them. We've already seen that the Environment Minister's under threat of losing his seat on polling, and it's all very early days. But the same sort of forces are at work here, Jack. That same millennial demographic, people coming in and voting in that 18 to 34 block and avoiding the Liberal Party. 4 out of 5.
Dominic Perrottet is not Matthew Guy.
Well, look, I have to say, what happens to Matthew Guy? He has resigned. He has stood down now. He didn't on Saturday night. In fact, if you saw his speech and didn't look at his face, you'd think he'd had a pretty good night. They've got a lot of time servers there. I
didn't actually see the speech. Was he doing a Billy Mackey Snedden? We didn't lose.
He did do a bit of a we didn't win. Well, look, it was rather than we didn't win, but we didn't lose. Let's have a real good look at the positives here. And haven't the Nats done well? But that's not your party, mate.
And the Nats did do well.
They did do well. They pinched one. They pinched Shepparton off an Indy for sitting member. and they picked up a couple. They did lose Rippon. It looks very much like they'll lose Rippon now.
But their vote was generally up. So
Yeah.
I don't think this is the death of the conservative parties in Victoria. It's the death of the current iteration of the Liberal Party. That they've got to do something about fixing that.
Look, they really don't have much by way of new faces there. I see the tennis players. His name Groff, I think. He's been elected. Although no, that's actually gone back into play.
When you said tennis player, I was immediately thinking Josh Frydenberg.
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of talk that Josh might come back because the Teals didn't do all that well in his, in the state seats around Kooyong.
Perhaps Josh's future is as a state Liberal rather than a federal one.
Well, that sort of brings us to our next point, Jack. But just to wrap this up, there are really big problems federally for the Libs. I'll be writing about this on Wednesday, where they can go, where they're sort of going afoul and not really addressing their issues. No regeneration, no rejuvenation, and not a lot of new faces in the party. Their uptake or their approvals with young professional women is that they're getting about 1 in 10 votes there. It's terrible. So anyway, before we wrap this up, there'll be a bronze statue for Dan, mate. This was something that the Jeff Kennett legislated, that there be a statue for premiers who had served for 10,000 days or more. So there'll be a big bronze one. Geez, that'll get graffitied, won't it?
There are so many people getting statues these days, all the sports fellas outside the MCG and the SCG, and now for premiers as well. Is this like having a book written about you by Peter Fitzsimons? Everyone's going to get one,
Well, maybe that's it. I think I would not like to be cast in bronze, Jack, because everyone you see just doesn't. You look at them and go, that doesn't look anything like them.
No, none of them are very impressive, I reckon. But that might be me. I think I'd much rather have Peter Fitz do a biography.
Well, not sure. Well, his team. So yeah, there will be the bronze statue, and I think as of Easter, he will become the longest-serving Labor premier in Victorian political history, beating John Cain Jr. But you mentioned Josh Frydenberg, Jack, and of course the Morrison report came out.
Well, I think we called it here first. He is going to be the most ex-prime ministers, and he was after a few weeks. And
it's not looking like he'll make his way back anytime soon.
No.
So Nikki Sava wrote about this, Jack, which included the first words from Josh Frydenberg at some time, and Josh was predictably unhappy about learning that he was a joint treasurer with the Prime Minister.
No, he wasn't happy at all.
He wasn't happy at all.
And he suggested that Matthias Cormann would have been even more unhappy if he'd known. He would have gone ballistic.
He would have gone ballistic, yeah. So there is now talk of a censure motion in the Parliament. What does that mean, Jack?
Well, not much, really.
You get censured? What's that mean? You got to go and sit in the corner for 4 weeks?
Yeah, well, it means no one wants to talk to you. Yeah.
But no one wants to talk to him now.
Yeah, so he's already sitting on his own in the playground at little lunch. I mean, it's not going to make much difference.
He is indeed.
Yeah, I like that. Nikki Sava also dredged out an old comment from my former local member, a lovely fella by the name of Jerry Hand. Who was the member for Melbourne back in the days when it was Labor heartland.
Black Hand, wasn't he? Black Jerry?
Black Jerry, yeah. A little bloke from Warrnambool originally. I think he came by the meat workers, perhaps. Yeah, not sure. Anyway, he said that he was fond of saying that all prime ministers go mad after a while, even in supposedly normal times, and these are extraordinary times. Yeah. And I think that's true. There's always a tinge of madness about our prime ministers.
Well, it does raise the issue, though, that had these 5 ministers, Karen Andrews, Stuart Robert, we don't know about Stuart perhaps, Alex Hawke was another one, Matthias Cormann and Josh Frydenberg, had they known, would there almost certainly been a spill.
Absolutely.
And it does create at least a what-if a sort of hypothetical situation, how would Josh have gone against Albo in May?
Would have been much more competitive. A good deal of the Liberals' bad result, I feel, in the federal election was down to the fact that people had well and truly had enough of Scott Morrison. And Josh Frydenberg's a much, much more appealing person. I think there would have
But he
been
lost his seat.
Yeah, but I think there would have been, that was partly the Scott Morrison factor rather than the Josh Frydenberg factor, in my view. I'm pretty sure there would have been a spill because this would have been seen as an extraordinary breach of trust amongst the cabinet group.
Oh, yeah, extraordinary. That's it. I mean, it's a betrayal of his colleagues, of his most senior colleagues, isn't it? That's where it stands. I mean, talk about sitting on the seat in the playground on his own. I get the feeling now that Scott would have the taxpayer-provided phone, of course, but I don't think it'll ring all that much.
He'd be more likely to find a Labor member come and sit next to him at the playground than a Liberal one, I think, at the moment.
Just check my phone, see if the dial tone's on. Just check it. Just check it. Any messages? Yeah. No? Yeah. Look, it provides that sort of what about hypothetical in 2019. I don't know. I think Josh probably would have still got rolled anyway. I think,
probably would have.
And had they moved on, it would have looked like chaos and without people having an awareness of what Morrison had pulled. By the time they got to vote, it would have just looked like another Liberal leadership spill and more chaos and so forth. I think their time is
but it's the most bizarre behaviour from a federal politician since the days of Rex Connor.
I reckon he's got old Rex
covered.
covered.
I reckon he might have him covered. Yeah.
I reckon he's got him covered there. All right, Albo's had a win, another win. Gee, he's going all right, isn't he? He's had a win with his IR bill, and he got the support through negotiation of the ACT crossbench senator David Pocock, who seems to be I just want to talk about him firstly, Jack. He seems to be a man who takes his job very seriously, which we like, and is a man that the Labor Party can deal with.
Well, he's turned from being a hard-working back rower for the Wallabies to a hard-working politician straight away. Yeah. Look, you just never know how people are going to go in politics until you give them the job. But he's certainly hit the ground running. He seems sensible. He speaks well on the television, and he looks like and sounds like he's trying to be a senator for all ACT people.
That's right, and that's his job. That's his job. They've got to represent their states or their territories, and he's doing that job. Now, the negotiations involved a number of elements. I believe now that there will be a committee established to review social welfare every year to determine whether it needs to rise. I think Pocock was pushing hard for a rise in the job seeker payment. I think that's the current name for it, the rock and roll, and as well as a raft of other things like the DSP, disability pension, those sorts of things too. Now, he didn't get it, and what Labor's come back with him is a sort of yes minister classic, where we'll have a committee and we'll review what needs to be done, and that committee will make recommendations to the government. So that was the first thing they negotiated over, and also just how many businesses will be affected by this, by the new IR laws, which I don't think many people know much about at this stage. There was a bit of a scare campaign. I was listening to the Senate on Friday that sat and the Libs sought to refer the bill to a committee, which essentially would have sent it off until early next year, and that would have allowed them to run a bit of a scare campaign about this. Unions out of control and what have you, stuff that meat and drink for the Liberal Party. But no, it's gone. It will go through this week with the support of Pocock. I just want to read Ewan Hannon, who's a fantastic industrial affairs journalist at the Oz. He said this, Jack. News flash, multi-employer bargaining is not industry-wide bargaining. Even if so desired, unions representing less than 1 in 10 private sector workers do not have the reach to conduct industry-wide strikes. Indeed, as Svitzer showed through its threatened indefinite lockout of tugboat crew, employers are the ones willing to use Labor's Fair Work Act to cause major economic harm and shut down industries, not organised labour. Ooh, imagine reading that in the pages of the Australian, Jack.
Well, the Australian, one of the reasons why it's the only newspaper I pay a sub for is that it does have a variety of views, much more so than the Nine newspapers. I still think of them as Fairfax. One thing I think I would add to what Ewan Hannon says is that one of the aims of this legislation is to bring relevance back to the union movement so that they will have more than 10% coverage, that there will be some incentive for people to join the union movement, which has been absent for 25 years.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's something that will change. I don't think we're looking at massive upheavals in our industrial relations landscape. There are concerns about taking things away from central wage fixing, but overall, the alarmists have lost and Albo's had a win.
Well, like a lot of these things, you can't always tell exactly how they're going to work until they're put in place, because part of it will be determined by how the Fair Work Commission treats it when it gets in front of it. So you always got to be a little bit cautious about it. Just speaking of Ewan Hannon, do you know whether the Nine newspapers still have a dedicated industrial relations?
Well, I've never seen if they have. It's a little bit like the arts editor at the Daily Telegraph, Jack. They don't.
Wouldn't that be a job? You can sign me up for that one tomorrow.
I'd send the resume in for that. Just give me a call. I'm at lunch. It's not a lot going on there. So Ewan does a wonderful job. He is a fantastic journalist, and as you say, look, he calls it as he sees it. I mean, he's not a reporter that takes a particular ideological view into his reporting. If he's writing an opinion piece, as he was today, that might be a little bit different. But it looks like Labor's going to end its year on a high note. All those things that it said it was going to do, the anti-corruption body, the changes to the industrial relations environment, and I think that the last cab off the rank is to basically allow the territories to consider their positions on what do we call it, Jack? I'm trying to speak euphemistically here, but death by choice, shall we say?
Assisted suicide. I think assisted. The current.
No, it's not assisted. I think that's the wrong term. That's the last cab off the rank.
Yeah,
the Senate.
Language is important. There was a time when something was called abortion. Now it's reproductive health care.
It is. It's a termination.
But it is finishing the year off well for Labor. The craft beers are going to taste nice for Albo, and he's going to be able to settle down there, have Christmas at Kirribilli with the family, and pop off to the SCG for the cricket, and probably go on the ABC. And let's hope he doesn't make a fool of himself like Kevin Rudd did, pretending he was there at cricket. He wasn't that,
Oh, he didn't. He loved. I actually watched Kevin Rudd give a speech, and that was at the opening of the Trumper stand at the SCG. We gathered on the ground to hear various noteworthy people speak, including Nathan Rees, who made a superb speech, and I actually spoke to his speechwriter after and congratulated him for it, because he actually acknowledged Trumper in the speech, and the clamour around the great man whenever when Sydney would just basically people would just leave their work because the great Victor was batting at Redfern. And tonking them all over the place, and Nathan Rees made mention of that, and then Kevin got up and he started talking about Doug Walters, Kevin Douglas Walters, Doug Walters, and there was a bar named after Doug in the stand, but and he was a great cricketer, of course, but Victor Trumper didn't get a mention, which is very, very odd. And then he sort of talked about how he fell in love with cricket and so forth, and it was really just an awful, awful speech.
Well, I can remember when he was first Prime Minister and he was doing the recollection thing. I can remember being at the Gabba when such and such happened, and of course it never did.
Yeah, well, there was a bit of that in this speech too, and eyes did quickly glaze over at Nathan Rees, the very short-lived Premier of
He's a
New
good
South
man,
Wales.
Nathan Rees.
Yeah, look, he certainly outshone Kevin. Now we're going to go around the world now, Jack, and China. This is unheard of. The protests at the moment. There was a fire in Shanghai, and I believe there's a fatality.
The fire was in Urumqi, way out west.
Oh, okay.
10 people died, and the protesters are alleging that the reason that they died, it's in a residential building, was that the firefighters were unable to get access to the building because of lockdown restrictions. And the local officials have denied that, said that's just plain not true. This is China. It's always a bit hard to know. It's not a terribly transparent country. But there have been reasonably sizey protests in Shanghai, Beijing, Nanjing, sort of all over the place, really. And the protests are really about the zero COVID severe lockdown.
And calling for the CCP to stand down.
And Xi Jinping to stand down.
And the president to stand down, yes.
One of the journalists says it's the biggest protest since 1989. I've got to say...
And that's Tiananmen. That's Tiananmen Square, yeah.
I've got to say, I don't think that the leaders of the Communist Party will be in the Forbidden City putting desks up against the door to fend off the mob. The protests were, while vigorous, relatively small in number, and it's a very big country. So,
yes, indeed, but it must give them some cause, and I'm talking about the CCP and the president. It must give them some pause about their COVID policies, because they're the only ones in the world who are continuing this lockdown.
There are some logical reasons why they are. Like Hong Kong, they have a problem with low vaccination rates amongst the elderly. They have limited faith in their own healthcare system. In particular, the numbers of ICU beds are really, really quite low. In some parts of the country, 6 per 100,000 people, for instance. So they're concerned about that, and they made a choice not to use the mRNA vaccines, but to use their own Sinovac vaccine, and it seems, at least at this stage, that doesn't work as well. So
not quite as effective. Yeah, we've known that for a little while, and that would be a major sort of, shall we say, slap in the face for Chinese technology and all that sort of stuff.
There was talk on social media this morning that the Chinese government or the Chinese telcos were censoring the coverage of the FIFA World Cup so people wouldn't see the huge crowds of maskless people in the stands, so that they were cutting to close-ups of the players and the coaching staff rather than sweeping the camera, taking the feed or sweeping the camera across. I don't know whether that's true or not. No idea. But there's always a million people who will tell you on social media that this is going to cause the imminent collapse of the Chinese.
That's a little. I'm going to say that's a little premature.
Yeah, and I've been hearing that almost weekly since I've been up in the region for just 14, 15 years.
I was always going to say, that not too many viruses can survive in Qatar either, Jack. 52 degrees, blazing heat.
Yeah.
So there's also that. But just next door in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is not really democratic at all, oddly, Kim Jong-un has trotted out his daughter she looks like a little Kim, albeit a teenage girl. Trotted her out at an ICBM launch, Jack. I saw that. The photo showed the girl believed to be Kim's second child. He has a son who's older, but just hasn't been presented to the public yet. It might be on the burgers. Might be a little bit too chubby. And she was dressed in a black coat with a fur collar, linking arms with her father. And the reason they're doing this, according to Yang Mu-jin, as a professor at the University of North Korean Studies in South Korea, said the daughter's presence was meant to portray the ICBM as the protector of future generations. It looks like he will.
That's a bit of a stretch, I reckon.
It is a bit of a stretch, but what they have been able to do, this is the great trick for any nation that wants to become a nuclear nation by having to start essentially from scratch without any support in terms of technology, is the ability to miniaturize and load onto an ICBM a nuclear warhead without disturbing the aerodynamics of the ICBM. And apparently that has now been done. And this is why they've been firing missiles left, right, and centre, including over the bows of Japan on a number of occasions. What are we going to do about this bloke, mate? Do we just ignore him?
It's hard to know. They've tried almost everything, and none of it's quite worked, really.
No, nothing's ever worked. I thought going back many years, it sort of sat down and said, "All right, we'll give you fuel, we'll give you food. Can you stop misbehaving, please?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, we'll do all that." And then as soon as W was gone, they were back at it again.
I think Bill Clinton did much the same thing.
Yeah. They're just a pariah state.
The only people who can bring them into line, really, are the Chinese.
That's right. And there are exports and imports and so forth. I did know that they closed that border during the pandemic, and we were expecting some very, very horrible scenes to come through there because there were no vaccines.
I've got a couple of pals here from Hong Kong who've made trips, been over a couple of times to Pyongyang. I think it's a very odd place.
It's a very strange place. I think Michael Palin's doco there, that was when Jong-un's old man was running the show. Was a real good insight into it. They're just taken around to these vast buildings that just look so impressive, but they wouldn't let him in.
There's not much inside them.
Not much going on inside. Well, I remember the hospital one where you wouldn't want to get sick out the front anyway. No. There's nothing much would happen. All right, we've talked a lot about Sri Lanka as a country in deep economic trouble, and Jack, you've got an update on that. We haven't really mentioned them, but and we've just sort of let them be. But the misery continues.
Yeah, I think the last time we talked about them, the IMF had agreed in principle to a loan that would be big enough, $2.9 billion bailout. Well, they're working. The Sri Lankans are working against time to get background deals with China, Japan, and India to ensure that deal goes through. And that means, of course, all the usual things of satisfying those countries that they're serious about addressing their problems. So it all looks like it's going okay. It's got some hurdles to get over yet, but it all looks like it's going okay. It's sort of good news. But they really need this, because I think the last figures I saw from the World Food Programme was that 6 million people in Sri Lanka are what they call food insecure. That is, they need assistance for daily living.
Right. Yeah, and this is the sort of thing that we expected. It was heightened. This economic crisis was heightened by the activities or the policies of the previous government, which drove their food production away from chemical fertilizers and into a new organic future, which completely failed within the space of about 9 months. They turned it over, but by then the damage had been done. They'd lost their major export dollars from a sale of tea, and in crops like rice, they were unable to provide their own needs.
Yeah, what they really need is to get this loan, get things up and going. Hope that their other great dollar earner, which is the tourism ministry, gets up and going. It's a lovely place. I've not been, but plenty of friends have, and some people have bought over there, bought property over there. It's a terrific place to visit, and they need to get that tourism ministry up and going.
Yes, indeed. They do indeed. You and I have often talked about popping over there to watch a bit of cricket, which would be a lovely tour to go to.
Yeah, down at Gaul, I think would be the spot.
Oh, yeah, that would be a very nice spot. Looks lovely there. The old fort on the coastline. Over in the States, Jack, is the state of emergency over? What state of emergency have they got?
This is the COVID state of emergency, which was legislation passed in the middle of the COVID outbreak, and the Senate has been attempting to end the state of emergency for all year, pretty much. They voted 48-47 to end it in March, and 62-36 just a week or so ago.
Yeah, that tells us a fair bit about American politics, doesn't it? That, and we talked about this last week, but it's just worth reminding people that while you might have 50-50s and what have you, and of course the Georgia runoff is occurring next week or the week after, there's no requirement on either party to vote along party lines. So
it happens more so in the House, but in the Senate there's almost
62-36. That's a big result. That's a big result.
Unfortunately, for people who want to end the emergency, they need 67 to override the presidential veto, and they're not quite there yet.
Yeah, not far away. All right. How do you see the Georgia runoff going, Jack? Have you had much of a look at that?
Oh, it's a bit hard to call that one.
It's going to be close. I know that's not saying much, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be. Look, I suspect the Warnock will probably get up, but gee, it's going to be close. And it looks like the House is going to end up as a mirror image of the current House.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, look, it may well be 51-49, but we'll have to see how that goes. And in the House, Jack, what are the numbers looking like there now? We've covered the midterms extensively.
Yeah, but my guess now is around about 221, 213, which is a mirror image of the current House, except it'll be a Republican majority rather than a Dem one. So the same slim majority again. And
so, yeah, look, I'm very, very proud of myself there, Jack. I said 7. I think 7 before the midterms. So
that's the idea.
That's champagne punditry.
Yeah, when you're going to be a pundit, you got to remember the ones you got right and bury the ones you got wrong.
Well, Friday's column, I don't want to talk about it too much, but I thought there were going to be like 15 on the crossbench, and it looks like there'll be about 6. So I didn't get the numbers quite right there, but absolutely spot on in the House of Representatives in the United States. We are going to do a bit of a special on political sledging, Jack. We've got to do some research because this is a very important topic.
It is.
Bit of wit and wisdom from our politicians. We haven't seen a lot of it of late, but I was reminded with the election, with the election in Victoria just finished. I was reminded of Dan Andrews on the day after he'd won the Danslide in 2018. He said of Michael Kroger, he said this on the ABC, actually said it on the Sunday show there. He said of Michael Kroger, swanning around suburbs that you've never been to in your Burberry trench coat, lecturing people about the cost of living. People pick fakes and they pick nasty fakes from a long way off. I hope that he's the Liberal Party president for life.
Ouch.
Well, Michael was on the Sky News coverage and seemed not to have learned a whole lot. Look, some of the things that Kroger actually did say on the Sky News coverage were quite sensible, and that was, some of these older members who've done nothing in the Liberal Party, particularly in the upper house. David Davis as treasurer, just go, mate, and one or two others, including the sitting member for Caulfield, who probably will be re-elected, done absolutely nothing in their careers. And think, oh, well, I'll just have another 4 more years of this. And it's just no way to run the party. They need, when we talk about rejuvenation, they need to basically have some. I guess it's a bit of a roll of the dice, but they need to have probably about 6 or 8 by-elections.
They do. Look, and this was the exact same problem we faced in the Labor Party in Victoria in the pre-John Cain Jr. years. We had a lot of people who were exactly as you described, been there for too long, but happy to pick up 4 more years. And they had to be kind of crowbarred out and replaced with people who are actually interested in winning government.
Well, there's that too. And I think Labor did this. We talked about Frank Maguire, and clearly he was a very popular local member. But one of the reasons he was shelved, and look, I won't go into it too much because I don't know just exactly what the factional shenanigans were about him getting the flick. But Andrew's senior ministry, a lot of blokes who were just, including his deputy, and including Martin Pakula, who was sort of minister for not quite everything for a while, but the important things, racing and sport, they were sort of exhausted and they happily trotted off. Now, that might mean that there's a bit of a vacuum in terms of public administration and the knowledge of how ministries work, but it also means you've got new faces and you have rejuvenated, and the Liberal Party just haven't done that.
Yeah. I always thought Martin Pakula had picked himself the best jobs. I had lunch a couple of years ago with a South Australian minister who was visiting Hong Kong, and he was Minister for Tourism, Racing and Sport. And I thought, that's about it.
That's the trifecta,
isn't
That
it?
is the trifecta. That is the That's where you want to be. You'll never put your hand in your pocket. You'll never have to put your hand in your pocket, and the lunch wherever you go is going to be superb.
Yeah, he's a lovely fella, very funny.
Martin Pakula was pretty good too. I had a fair bit to do with him when we were lobbying the government on behalf of Dennis Ryan. I had a fair bit to do.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
he's a good Carlton man. So we had that at least to talk about, and we had a bit of a yum cha one day, which is a very Labor Party thing to do.
So he's used to disappointment then if he's a Carlton man, isn't he?
I think I think he thinks that the Blues are well on the way. I see David Parkin was down at training, mate. I think he wants to be a bit of a part of it too. It's good that they've got the old heads there. And that takes us into sport. We're going to have a long, hard talk about the World Cup and FIFA, Jack. Just to kick us off, of course, there were riots in Belgium when the Belgians got knocked off.
Yeah. The Moroccans beat the Belgians yesterday or overnight, and the Moroccan-born and Moroccan ethnic Belgians decided to burn a few cars in the centre of the city in celebration.
Well, it is one way to reduce emissions, Jack. Probably the wrong way.
Yeah,
but yeah, and it was said to be a disgraceful. So that's the cause of it, is it? It wasn't just Belgians a bit angry that they'd lost.
No, it's from the footage I've seen, it appears to be Moroccan-born Belgians who are doing this.
We were talking a bit about this. We did an overflow episode for our wonderful patrons at the Conditional Release program, and Roy Keane. Have you heard Roy Keane's speeches on whether? Well, he's obviously very, very dogmatic that the Qatar should never.
Roy only has one setting, and that's dogmatic.
Yeah, he's a hard man, isn't he? He's a
still
hard,
a hard
Irish,
man.
unforgiving man.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful clip of him with one of his opponents, and I'm not quite sure who it was for. He was playing for Man United, of course, Roy Keane. But one of his opponents, the captain, was waiting for him to shake hands as they went out on the pitch, and Royce just walked straight past him. No time for that. Going to go play game.
Yeah, he's no diplomat. He sits up there with the big beard, looks like a Eastern Orthodox patriarch.
He does
and pontificates like one as well.
But he's just eminently listenable, and he has made it very, very clear that Qatar shouldn't have got these games, and that is absolutely clear. And we don't really need to go over the 2010 announcement or 2012 announcements, where Russia won the games under very dubious circumstances, and Qatar probably even more so. The
great news, of course, was that Australia spent about $50 million on and got
45.6. Yeah. I mean, we talked about this in the conditional release program. All they should have done with that 40, if they're going to spend $45 million, you grab 8 won't be enough. That would be too many. You'd have to grab 4 delegates and go, right, there's 10 million each, and you'll get 4 votes. As it stood, we got 1.
They could have given you and I about 42 of it.
Yeah.
I reckon we're going to organise one vote.
We could have got one vote. We could have got one vote, which ultimately they did. The Americans got 8, which was clearly the best bid. It was just, where soccer should have been played. Great stadiums, great facilities, all of this stuff. But, of course, the Secretary General of the North American FIFA affiliate, which is known as by the acronymic CONCACAF, Jack Blazer, he didn't even vote for the Americans. He's living in New York and did not vote for the Americans.
This is what's it called? CONCAF, isn't it?
CONCACAF, CONCACAF. CONCACAF, yes. Mm. And, of course, the president, who was a Trinidadian, he voted for Qatar as well. And there's no doubt.
I think he's now having a holiday. Is he the Trinidadian president?
No, he's not. He's not. And none of them ever did. He can't. He's not allowed to set foot in the United States again.
Oh, okay.
Because there are warrants out for his arrest. I think there were 14 arrests made, and I think 10 of those were what we call the XCOM, which is almost right, which is the executive committee of FIFA, which decides where bids will go, and who will host World Cups. And so the Qataris won 22 million. There's credible allegations of a $4.5 million bribe paid to 3 African XCOM members. All denied, of course, particularly by the Qataris. But there was a record of a meeting with these 3 FIFA delegates, and they were offered. Well, one of them was offered $1 million, and he looked at them and said, "No, that won't be enough." And so they jacked it up to 1.5, but all for the development of the game, Jack. So they got 1.5 million, all for the development of the game. The trouble with that is we don't know where it went.
No, we don't.
Now, that's not Jack farting, by the way, although it does sound a little bit like one of his farts. That is a bit of construction noise.
It is.
We're hoping that that's not going to get much louder. But, yes, Jack lives in basically...
in a building site.
Yeah, it's just a building site. He's just sort of hanging off some scaffolding as we speak. But we'll keep going. Now, Budweiser was supposed to be a major sponsor, Jack.
And they had the porridge rights as well for the beer at the tents.
What did they pay for that? Millions?
50 million euros
wow.
or something. And the week before the event started, the Qataris said that no, there was going to be no beer sales at the stadiums.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. They just simply don't understand sport.
Yeah. So the Budweiser have announced 2 things. Firstly, they're going to donate all of that beer to the winning team, and secondly, they're going to sue FIFA to get their money back.
Yeah, I
was just wondering, what do you do with 50 million euros worth of soapy water? I don't know.
Soapy water. Budweiser is an awful, awful beer. It's occasionally sold here. If you wander around Dan Murphy's, you might be able to pick up a carton for $30 or something. But it's hardly worth drinking.
Well, in the hipster areas of Sydney, they'll pay $15 for a Pabst Blue Ribbon, a PBR. Which you can buy in a gas station in the United States for less than a carton of milk,
I don't know. I don't know what that is. I do know what a Budweiser is. I've had a couple and they're not much fun. So whoever wins, and we'll get to that in a little while, we'll get to who we think's going to win, is going to be basically having to drink a lot of very bad beer for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, when we go, all jokes aside, the Qataris have built, I think it's 7 or 8 stadiums out of the blue. When they won the bid, they didn't have any. There were no stadiums at all in Doha or in Qatar generally, so they've had to build them from scratch.
Have you been watching the World Cup?
Oh yeah.
I'm going to tell you something that you won't be able to unsee. A lovely journalist for The Guardian in the UK by the name of Marina Hyde
Very, very funny columnist. Very funny.
And a funny columnist at The Guardian. That takes some doing, I can tell you, because they're normally earnest, normally as earnest as all get out. She pointed out that the big stadium, if you look at it from above, bears a striking resemblance to a vagina.
Oh, dear, oh dear.
And I'll tell you what, once you've heard that, and once they show you the overhead shot, you'll go, I can't unsee that ever again now, because it does.
There he goes. There we go.
She said that she could imagine that the committee of men sitting around designing the stadium in Qatar, none of whom would ever want to confess they've seen one, wouldn't have been game to say, hey, just hang on, guys, look, you know.
Yeah. Look, well, they probably wouldn't be. It's not their strong suit, Jack.
No.
The female anatomy is just not going to be their strong suit. Look, in all seriousness, the Guardian did report, a Guardian investigation reported the deaths of 6,500 foreign workers over a period of time. Not all would have been working on World Cup infrastructure, but many of them would have been.
They're pretty much indentured labourers there.
They are. They've just lifted, the Qataris have just lifted this this practice where a foreign worker could not leave without the permission of their employer, could not leave the country. Now they claim that part of their sweeping reforms in industrial relations that they've removed that now, but apparently practically it still exists. You've got people working in extraordinary conditions. The 6,500 figure is almost certainly low because their Guardian investigation relied on the assistance of records from Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and I think Sri Lanka, but it did not take into account workers from Eastern Africa and Kenya, etc., or where a substantial number of workers come from the Philippines. So it's all. This is all a bit of sports washing, Jack, and you just wonder, how much more of this is UEFA or the UEFA nations going to take. I mean, I think the Danes are pretty upset. They've talked about leaving FIFA, and we'll see if that actually happens. It would be a bold move to do it unilaterally. But if they did so with the support of, let's say, Germany and England, well, that would just about be the death knell for FIFA.
One of the things we have to remember is that the values that the West are sticking up for in the Qatari decision, absent, let's leave it aside. I think no one's very happy about the workers who were killed, but all the rest of it, the gay rights, etc., etc. These are very popular views in the West, but not very popular in the rest of the world.
Yeah, but Jack, I mean, I've listened to Infantino and a whole lot of others. Gianni Infantino is the president of FIFA at the moment after Sepp Blatter was marched off in disgrace. They come up with all this false equivalence nonsense, Europe is evil, Europe colonised the world and did horrible things and so forth. I mean, it's beyond the pale. If you were going to hold these games, the idea that you promote an inclusive sort of approach, I mean, there'll be footballers playing who are gay. I mean,
yes.
Not that they have to identify or stand up or do anything. I would say there were some, fairly timid, woke sort of protests. The English and the Germans, I think, were two nations at least that I know of, were going to put their captains in rainbow armbands. And they applied through FIFA to do that. And FIFA got back to them just before the tournament started. No, they'd done. They made the application weeks before. And FIFA had said, no, because the Qatari government had said no. And so the captains themselves faced a yellow card at best if they did so. Now, and so they pulled out of it. I mean, it's hardly stuff that Rosa Parks would be would have accepted. Oh, what you mean? Oh, I won't sit in the front of the bus then.
Well, I think what Roy Keane said was, okay, wear the damn thing and cop a yellow card, and then you'll have to play a bit more carefully. You know?
That's a real protest, Jack. That's and you go, okay. Oh, so you mean there are going to be consequences? All right, we'll take them, but we're going to go on with this. So it was a bit weak. The German football side were photographed. They've had a terrible tournament, by the way, but the German side was photographed with hands over mouths to indicate that they'd been silenced.
That was a tremendously good protest, that wasn't it? You know, I mean, so effective.
I mean, look, I guess horses for courses, because the Iranian team not singing their national anthem, I consider that to be a highly courageous act. You know,
it took a fair bit more guts than putting your hand over your face.
Yeah. So look. The simple fact of the matter is, how much longer before FIFA is told, all right, you might run this tournament, but you don't run the game.
Well, the trouble with that is that the Europeans can decide that, but they won't get support from the Africans and the Asians.
I think the Latins would. I think the Latins, where the two big bases of soccer around the world is Europe and South America.
I don't think the South Americans will agree with the Europeans on that.
I would think the Brazilians just get on with it because they win tournaments, they win World Cups, but there'd be a strong view within the South American sides, the Argentinians, the Brazilians, the Uruguayans. I think are the three from South America who would fall into place. I mean, what we're talking about, Jack, is the sort of the Australian Cricket Board. They were informed in no uncertain terms that you might think you run various competitions, but you don't run the game, and that's what Packer showed them, and that's what probably needs to happen to some degree at FIFA before real reform occurs there.
Yeah. Who's going to win?
All right. Well, the most impressive team so far to me, France, England. I think England are a big chance, big chance, and Brazil. Brazil look cherry ripe.
Yeah, well,
but
the Germans...
No Neymar. I don't know what the result of his scan was. He was off to get a scan and he looked very upset because it looked like he was going to miss the rest of the tournament. But
the Germans drew with Spain overnight, so they're really in a spot of bother to get out of the group stage. And the Belgians likewise, losing to Morocco.
Yeah.
So.
Australia will play Denmark. I think it's Wednesday morning our time. And they need a win gets them straight through. A draw.
And a draw may well do.
Yeah, provided France beats Tunisia, and they should. The French look good. The Brazilians look cherry ripe, and so does England. I'm thinking, in dollar terms, Jack, just in terms of player salaries, England is number one. Now that tells you that the Premier League is the ultimate competition in terms of dollars.
They sell a hell of a lot of shirts over here, I can tell you.
I'm sure they will, Jack. Look, it's been a long time, hasn't it, for Foundation in Soccer. 1966 was their one and only World Cup in England. One at Wembley, beating the Germans 1-0, wasn't it, Jack?
Oh, I know, Ray. There was at least 2 goals scored. Yeah. Okay. There's still arguments over at least one of those goals.
Yeah, I think there is, isn't there? So we'll see. And look, Australia. Did you see Australia have a very good win against Tunisia?
Yeah, it was a rubbish game, but it was good to have a win.
It was good to have a win. Defensively, I saw a number of attempted clearances and so forth, and just thought, "Oh, come on, man!" There was. I just don't know how they'll go against sides who might, like the Danes, who'll need to attack and score heavily with their defensive setup as it is at the moment. But they've got a big They got a big squad there, and who knows? We wish them well.
I watched a bit of the Japanese against Costa Rica last night. The Japanese looked terrific, but ended up losing the game.
Yeah, I know. That's happened a bit. I mean, the Germans against the Japanese ultimately won, and they should have been 3-0 in front at half time, and they just didn't put them away. They'd kicked a penalty goal, and Japan came over the top of them. All right, Jack. Now, we're just going to move on to other sport. There is, believe it or not, other sport being played around the world. We'll get to one of our reader letters shortly about ODIs, but the Adelaide Strikers won the Women's Big Bash on the weekend and beating the Sydney Sixers. Who we have there? Deandra Dotton got 52 and 2 for 30 for the Strikers, and Ashley Gardner won the Player of the Series. She plays for the Strikers. Very good cricketer. Alyssa Healy only got one. She's the skipper of the Sydney Sixers, and it seems like if she doesn't get runs, both the Sixers and Australia don't go all that well. But Talia McGrath was the captain of the Adelaide Strikers side. She got 24 and got a wicket as well. Very, very fine Australian cricketer. So that's the end of that tournament with the Adelaide Strikers getting the chocolates there. And Melbourne in the AFLW Premiership defeated Brisbane, the Brisbane Lions, 2-7 to 2-3. Be still my beating heart, Jack.
Yeah, look, it's quite a watchable game, the AFLW, but it would be more watchable if they shrunk the size of the grounds a bit.
Shrink the size of the ground. And that's not being patronising. That just means that, that most women in that particular competition can kick the ball about 35, 40 metres.
Yeah,
And if they, if you reduce the side of that ground, it becomes that, instead of a 45-metre pass, it's a 30 or 25-metre pass. It hits a chest, the ball keeps moving. On a bigger ground, it tends to encourage a lot of scrambling, sort of ruck and maul type football. But
yeah. I don't think it's patronising either, Jack. I just think you just need to make the game work a little bit better. You need to reward good play, and because the ground's too big for the distance they can kick, the good play doesn't get rewarded often enough.
Yeah, and absolutely agree. And so just reduce the size of the ground. It's not, I don't think that would be a backward step. I don't know how the players feel about that, but that's to me what would make the game far more watchable. And on also happening on Wednesday, Jack, Test cricket is back. Woohoo! We do love the Test cricket. Australia will play the Windies, and I think it's 2 tests, just the 2. And there's lots to like about the Windies, Jack. They had a game against the Prime Minister's 11 in Canberra. They've got some very handy quicks, including a young fellow who's just 21 by the name of Jaden Seals, who does bowl fast and is likely to be the future of the West Indian attack. And they've got a reasonably decent, opening batting lineup. Their top order is actually reasonably strong with guys who really are hard to get out. And that's Craig Braithwaite, who's been around for a while. And, of course, the son of a gun who got a few in Canberra, Tagnarine Chanderpaul, son of Shivnarine, who was a very hard man to get out and a big accumulator of runs with not a bizarre technique. He had a good technique. It was just he had a bizarre stance.
He did. Warney had to turn one square to get him out of SCG one day, I remember.
Yeah. Get him out, yeah. He did have that weird sort of very front on stance, and then when the ball was bowled, he turned around into a sort of normal, almost traditional cricket stance. His son, Tagnarine, and I hope I pronounced that properly. I did watch him bat a bit too, and he's got something of the old man's sort of eccentricities as well. His front foot goes. He's his front foot. He's a left-hander like his old man. So it's his right leg goes a long way, sort of almost to the off, and then it comes back again. So he's developed a bit of the old man's eccentricities in the nets at home. So we look forward to a bit of Test cricket being played.
It'd be good to see the West Indies being back at being really competitive in international cricket again.
It definitely is. I mean, there's still. It's not as if the development of the game is going backwards there. It's just that structurally, the West Indies is it's not a nation. It's a series of islands, and the islands are always bluing about one another, and so the development of young players is a bit harder to do. The West Indies missed out on the first round of the T20 World Cup, which is staggering in itself because they've got some of the best T20 batsmen in the world, but a lot of them just didn't arrive. So there's just a lot of politics there, and what I think they need is 4 thumping fast bowlers and some good bats up the top. They had some great ones in the great old days, Viv and Gordon Greenwich and Richie Rich and those guys, but they need to get back to having 4 quick bowlers who are at you all the time, and hopefully that will happen.
Yep. Indeed.
And look, just to our reader, listener letter, I should say, and this is what Lawrence sent me this week, Jack. He said the latest 2 Jacks was a cracker, referring to last week's show. 2 possible questions for discussion in the future. Does the Federal Coalition fanboy audience with Jordan Peterson show they haven't learnt too much from their election defeat? And we'll get to the second point in a minute, which is a sporting point. And I thought that was a really good question. Now, on the night Dan Andrews was re-elected for a 3rd term, Jordan Peterson attended the tennis court, the tennis centre in Melbourne, and to a crowd of looked to me packed, which is about 15,000 people. He spoke there, and presumably people were paying $100 a ticket minimum.
Well, he certainly draws a crowd wherever he goes.
Yeah, I saw him interviewed one day, and he was saying that he gets about $500,000 a month in the Patreon, which is pretty good stuff. What my question was, Jack, to you is that why is the right sort of almost cult-like about people coming from overseas? I mean, you remember the noise around Milo Yiannopoulos and all this sort of stuff, and I'm not talking about the Liberal Party necessarily. I'm talking about the right. And it's almost as if they're not quite sure what they believe in, and so they need someone like Jordan Peterson or indeed Milo Yiannopoulos to come along and tell them.
Yeah, I've never been one to pay money to go to these kind of things. I mean, whether back in the days when the left used to do it as well.
It is something. I honestly think it's a right wing thing now, and for me
it is now. Yeah,
for me it's a sign that look. We sort of sit in our echo chambers of Twitter and Telegram and Facebook and all that sort of stuff, but we don't quite know what we believe. We've got no sort of underpinning of our beliefs. So we sort of need people like Jordan Peterson to come along and tell us what to think, basically.
Yeah, I've never seen the attraction of that myself.
No, neither have I. I think it tells you that there's a bit of a paucity of philosophy and ideology behind what we might call the conservative right. It must be said, while Peterson did do the tennis centre on Saturday night, prior to that, it was the LNP Senator Matty Canavan, who introduced Jordan Peterson to a group of Liberals, including Scott Morrison. I think Scott would just be interested and said, how much, do you really get that much to speak? Really? I can't get that much to speak publicly. In fact, no one wants me to speak publicly.
Yeah.
All right. The other element of Lawrence's question here was our discussion of one-day cricket internationals, attendance and popularity. Is Foxtel exclusive content where sports go to die? Oh, that's a bit rude. NRL and AFL maintain free-to-air presence, but sports like netball, rugby, basketball, motor racing have all suffered when hidden behind a paywall. Certainly rugby union did, and there's no doubt about that.
That happened to Test cricket in the United Kingdom as well. In England as well.
Yeah, it's not a good development for the game. I do know that Cricket Australia looking at taking their ODIs into free to air, and that's because that particular format of the game is. I think it's, we talked about it last week, dying for a number of reasons, mainly pointless fixtures. And, you're revving the engine up now, mate. Maybe taking it behind, so Australian T20s as it stands and Australian ODIs, whenever Australia plays, including in Australia, which is staggering to me, those games can only be seen if you've got a KO subscription or a Foxtel subscription. I don't think that's good for the game.
No, if you watch, Test cricket still draws a crowd in the United Kingdom, but if you have a look at it, and I tend to watch it here, it comes on the first sessions on at sort of cocktail hour, and I normally watch it with a few English pals, and you look around the crowd, and everyone looks to be over 45 or 50.
That's what
no
they're
young
saying.
people there at all. So they got a ticket price problem. They make the tickets so expensive you can't take your kids. And we're just doing a little straw poll in our group there, standing around the bar watching this. But everybody who's a Test cricket fan started out as a Test cricket fan because their father or their mother took them to the game, and that's just not happening.
Yeah, what they're saying, the Ashes will be played in the UK next year, but they won't be playing any tests in August, Jack. They're basically just going to compact the five test series.
Free up the time for the 100.
And that's to free up the time for the 100. Now, the argument goes, Jack, that that a 10-year-old or 11-year-old kid will watch the 100, but they won't watch Test cricket. And
that's because they don't get taken to Test cricket because the ticket prices are too expensive.
Yeah, that's part of the issue. But the argument goes from English cricket is that get young kids involved in the 100, they call it, their T20 competition, domestic T20 competition, and from there the interest in the game will grow. We'll see.
Well, I hope it works.
I hope it works, because if it doesn't, it'll be extremely bad.
Well, thank you, Lawrence. I reckon you're spot on anyway.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I think he thought the last show was a cracker. I'll look forward to hearing what he thinks of our latest. And we do apologise to one of our other listeners who we promised to do the political sledge on, and we will. It just needs a bit of work. We need to do a bit of research there, deep research. And just to take us out, Jack. Don't tell me you're. Go on.
I've got something new for you. Well, I was going to make a comment about Twitter, but the only comment I'd make about that is that he sacked a lot of people, and the website Twitter seems to work the way it always did. So you wonder what they were all doing there. Anyway, leaving that aside, there's a new book out. I think it's called Bond, the Beatles, and the British Psych. This chap called John Higgs. His theory is that Paul McCartney's band, having such a success with Live and Let Die, killed off any chance of the James Bond film, killed off any chance of the Beatles coming back to life. But he also tells a great little story. In 1978, George Harrison married Olivia Arias, and in the same year they had a son, Danny, D-H-A-N-I. Danny only discovered his father's past when he was at school. I came home one day from school after being chased by kids singing Yellow Submarine, and I didn't understand why. It just seemed surreal. Why are they singing that song to me? I came home and freaked out to my dad. Why didn't you tell me you were in the Beatles? And he said, oh, sorry. Probably should have told you that.
Danny actually did play. He's actually quite an accomplished musician himself now. He did play at a concert, basically, which was a tribute to George Harrison. And that's where we see the one and only Prince arrive on stage playing guitar and showing everyone what a wonderful musician he was. They talked about how they were going to have to do this because Prince was coming. Prince just hung off just at the side stage, just playing, just gently having a little bit of a strum, and then while they had a session muso playing, and they were playing While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and the session muso was getting very, very into it with his little lead breaks and so forth. And they wondered just exactly what they were going to tell him because Prince was coming on stage and he just stole the show. I recommend you have a look at it, listeners, on YouTube. He just shows what a wonderful musician, multi-talented musician he was. And the young bloke, the session muso just was basically left just languishing with the mouth open while Prince stole the show and finished his lead break, threw the guitar into the crowd and just walked off.
Well, we've both got kids who I'm pretty sure we don't tell them everything about what we've done in the past, but I reckon we would have mentioned it during the Beatles.
I was in the Beatles. Yeah, well said, mate. Okay, look, we're going to wrap up because that building noise is not far away again. We know it's not far away. So, and there's nothing we can do about it but stop and wait, but we don't want to get on with that. We thank you, listeners, for your time today. I hope you've enjoyed our coverage. Please drop us a line if you've got some questions, comments, criticisms, etc. to the... Well, you can get me on Twitter. I'm still there, despite Elon Musk's hate speech. But you can get me on there on DMs at Jack the Insider, or you can drop us an email on the conditional release program at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Good on you, Jack. Thank you very much for your time today.
Cheers, mate.
All the best. Thanks, listeners.